Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, Nasser.
Morning, Yusuf.
I must apologize for my voice today. I sound a bit different. Maybe I shouldn't do much singing these days.
Well, it's always sexy voice, Yusuf, and it's even more husky today. So maybe we can try and make some money.
Yes, we should consider that. Nasser, today, this week's episode will be dedicated to another Palestinian humanitarian crisis, as if, you know, we don't have enough.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the birthright of the Palestinian is challenge, it's adversity, it's dehumanization, it's pain, it's suffering, but it's also dignity.
Indeed, and this is another reminder that the Nakba is ongoing. It's not a one-off event or catastrophe that happened 70 years ago and now we live in the aftermath. It is happening every day. Now, the crisis we're talking about is inside Syria this time. Yeah. And we are revisiting the tragedy of Yarmouk camp and the areas in the southern part of Damascus. And we will talk about what happened to the families who stayed in Yarmouk until the last day of its destruction.
Well, Yusuf, I think firstly, I mean, we've spoken about Yarmouk before, and I know the work that we've done with Aspire has been dedicated to many Palestinian refugees, but the crisis we spoke about before, we should go back and remind our audiences to Yarmouk and its importance to Palestinian refugees, but also where it sits as a refugee camp post-48 to the Palestinians that were ethnically cleansed from Palestine.
Yep. Well, Yarmouk, Nasser, as you know, and most of our listeners know, is a refugee camp inside Damascus, in the southern part of Damascus. Like any other refugee camp, the inhabitants of today's camps are the grandsons and the descendants of refugees who were driven out from Palestine in 48. We know that some of them were internally displaced in Palestine and others fled to the Arab countries like Lebanon and Syria. And those who went to Syria, we're talking about around 100,000 people in 48. The majority of those who stayed in Damascus went to Yarmouk when it was first built in 1957, and there started another chapter of Palestinian diaspora. It was unique to other Palestinian refugee camps in its importance, first in its population and location, but also that it actually supported the Palestinian revolution with youth, with everything pretty much.
Well, it's a very nationalistic place. I mean, the names of the streets. I mean, we've spoken many times, because I know you've been there, about the culture and the food and the commerce.
Everything inside Yarmouk camp reminds you of Palestine. They created their imaginary Palestine in the southern part of Damascus. The streets, like you said, Nasser, are named after their hometowns and villages. The graffitis on the wall, the pictures, the symbols, and even the Palestinian dialect. So we're talking about the cultural hub, but also a thriving camp that was home for not only Palestinians, but also economically marginalized Syrians who could not afford rents in Damascus. On top of that, Yarmouk was also home for the Iraqi refugees. So up before the Syrian crisis, the population of Yarmouk was 1.2 million people. the Palestinians were nothing more than 300,000. So for that, Yarmouk camp deserved the title, the capital of Palestinian diaspora, عاصمة الشتات الفلسطيني, because of its symbolic value and because many of the Palestinian leaders are actually buried there. Khalil al-Wazir, Abu Jihad spoke about him on the show, and many other leaders.
So the Syrian crisis begins. The Palestinians within Yarmouk are in a no-win situation.
Yeah.
So choose the side. The decision is made that they will be non-partisan.
Yeah.
We're not going to support anybody. Leave us alone. We've got enough misery to deal with, having to educate our kids with the pittance that UNRWA gives us. Leave us out of your domestic situation. We've been used as a negotiating stick, as a flogging horse for too many, for too long. Just leave us out of it. And this, sadly...
This was their biggest crime, unfortunately, because there is no room for impartiality.
The crime isn't a crime. The
It's
crime
not a
was
crime.
a crime from both sides, whether you were the government or
Opposition.
the opposition, whatever, ISIS or whomever it might be.
Yeah.
Because you're not with us, you must be with them, and therefore you must suffer.
Indeed. You have put it precisely, Nasser. In civil wars, both parties want to involve every color in the spectrum, and the Palestinians were not the exception. To add to it, the strategic location of Yarmouk, because if you control Yarmouk, then you control the southern part of Damascus, and also the gateway to Reef Dimashq, rural Damascus. So the strategic location and also the symbolism of the Palestinian card is important. And the most important refugee camp in Syria is Yarmouk. So Yarmouk was targeted by opposition since day one, and of course by the regime
Well, they
forces.
took it in turns, murdering the Palestinians.
And
We've never
the-
had a friend there.
No. The turning point, Nasser, was in December 2012 when opposition took hold of Yarmouk, and the response of the regime was brutal. It targeted Yarmouk with MiG jet fighters, and we know that when you target any place with jet fighters, the destruction will be on large scale, not to mention targeting refugee camps, particularly Abdul Qadir al-Husseini Mosque and al-Fallujah School. And it resulted in the reduction of the population of Yarmouk from, like we said, 1.2 million to about 200,000 over less than a week.
Wow.
Due to first the extremely big number of human casualties and the large scale of destruction, but also due to the rumors that spread in the camp that what happened to these two targets might happen to other areas in the camp.
Now, some of those Palestinians decided to stay, Yusuf, having been one of the realities, what 48 taught many Palestinians was, you don't leave.
You don't leave.
You're better off dying in your home than getting displaced because you're
Then
not
do-
going to get to come back.
And also lose your dignity on
Lose your
the
dignity.
journey.
For some of those Palestinians decided to stay, regardless of the bombings, the murder, loss of their income, their families, their friends, their ability to provide sustenance to their children and education. They decided to stay. Now, for that, they've created a new level of pain and punishment, a new subset for Palestinians.
Exactly, Nasser. You're talking about 6 years of layers and layers of injustices. It started by putting the refugee camp under tightened siege, because yes, there are opposition forces inside the camp, but the Al-Assad forces were controlling the outskirts, and therefore there was tightened siege. It then led to the tightened hunger, and we all remember, Nasser, we protested against the hunger of Yarmouk in 2013, and the hunger resulted in the death of more than 220 Palestinians. Nevertheless, they stayed there. They created their unprecedented means of survival. One thing I want to highlight is that they included education in their definition of survival. They created parallel education because, unfortunately, UNRWA left the Yarmouk camp immediately after it was targeted in December 2012 and neglected the refugees and neglected its moral and legal responsibilities towards these people. So life is not going to stop, and you know the value, Nasser, of education for the Palestinian family. They created parallel education system, And eventually these schools, if we can call them schools, inside the areas that are taken under tightened siege, were recognized by UNRWA for their high standards of education. So they've seen siege, hunger, and then ISIS. ISIS came to the camp in 2015. And you can imagine, Nasser, how life looked like under the rule of ISIS and under the siege of another army that is as ruthless.
I've seen the vision.
And I lost one of my relatives by an ISIS sniper for simply trying to look for some food for his family, and he had to be buried in the garden of the mosque. You cannot even access cemeteries during the siege. And nevertheless, some of the Palestinians stayed there because, like you said, Nasser, they didn't want to repeat what happened in 48. Mm-hmm. And the last chapter was the eradication of terrorism, now between brackets, and basically defeating ISIS with no consideration to the civilians who stayed. And
the determination, Yusuf, as we spoke about before, was this is a hotbed of terrorism, an incubator of terrorism.
Yep.
And therefore, if you're there, according to the regime, the government, and ISIS is there, anybody that's there is ISIS, so it's a free opportunity to kill and maim and destroy anything that is in there.
Absolutely, Nasser. Unfortunately, it was an automatic justification that you are the enemy of the state under the pretext of fighting terrorism. Mm-hmm. And so the destruction of Yarmouk was complete. And we've seen the last 2 weeks of April and the first week of May, a complete carpet bombing, what they call carpet bombing. They didn't leave any inch of Yarmouk undestroyed. Mm-hmm. The irony is that it coincided with the Nakba anniversary, the 71st anniversary of Nakba. Now, the result is complete destruction.
Yeah. So those Palestinians that did stay, Yusuf, and survived the deprivation and the starvation, that survived ISIS, survived the carpet bombings, where are they now, Yusuf?
We're talking about around 700 families who stayed in Yarmouk camp, and you can add to them some of the Palestinians who lived in other areas in southern Damascus. But there is another wave of refugees that were added to them from other non-Yarmouk areas for the same reason. They were caught in the war in, let's say, Dar'a, in Handarat, in Homs, in Aleppo, and we have to mention Nayrab refugee camp. We also have to mention Al-Ramel refugee camp near Latakia. We have to mention Dar'a refugee camp in Dar'a. So what happened in Yarmouk happened in these areas in different details. So these people were viewed by the state, by the regime as, like you said, Nasser, incubator of terrorism. Or complicit.
You're with us or you're against us. I mean, this is a Western tribe, George W. Bush. You're with us or you're against us?
Yes, black and white. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they were viewed as you're against us, and they were forcibly removed from their homes, their destroyed homes, I should say, and they were sent to, as part of what they call the agreements between the regime and the opposition, and they were sent to opposition-held areas.
So physically today, we've got somewhere between 2,500 and maybe 5,000 or 6,000 Palestinian refugees from any number of refugee camps, from a once thriving community of 300,000 that swelled to 1.2 million after the devastation of Iraq. Now we've got these people haven't made it out to Jordan or Lebanon or Turkey or to any other countries in the west or east. These Palestinians now where are they physically now?
They are in rural Aleppo areas in 4 refugee camps. One is called Azaz, named after a village near Aleppo called Azaz, close to the Turkish border. Mm-hmm. Another one is called Deir Balut. Now, Deir Balut is much worse than Azaz. We'll talk about the situation inside these camps. And there are 2 other refugee camps. So there are in 4 makeshift or rural camps to the north of Syria. I must mention, Nasser, that we're talking about, around 750 families from the Yarmouk camp and other areas in the southern part of Damascus, but you have to add to them the non-Damascus Palestinians, like we said, from Homs and from Aleppo and from Dar'a. So we're talking about 1,100 to 1,200 Palestinian families. The population is more than 4,000 people Also, one thing we should mention is the treatment of the neighboring countries when it comes to the freedom of movement to Palestinians. But
before we go there, Yusuf, let's just stay in Azaz and Balut.
Yeah.
The reality, you said makeshift camps. These are Palestinians that went from, anybody who'd been to Yarmouk, let's just stay in Yarmouk for a moment, let's say 10 years ago, in as normal conditions as a Palestinian might ever expect.
Yeah.
It was almost normal.
It was normal.
You didn't have a travel document, but you could get arrested and interrogated at any one time, and being arrested and interrogated by Assad means, certain death, / re-education, and, if you did make it out, you were never the same again. We've gone from, if you will, the best situations that Palestinian refugees can encounter, Yarmouk 10 years ago, to again makeshift camps. So we're talking tents.
We're talking big tents. Now they separated the families. Males were taken to this side, and the women and children were taken to other side. And we're talking about big tents that, there's no family tents. And at least our grandfathers had the luxury of family tents. Now they're separated.
No running water, no electricity.
There's no electricity, no running water. There's daily food and water supply that's coming from either Turkish charity organization in coordination with the opposition and the Turkish government. But in terms of electricity, in terms of sewage, in terms of infrastructure, it's a luxury.
So we're doing a time machine gone back 70 years.
Even way before 70 years.
Yeah.
And this is Azaz now. Deir Balut, for a reason, is in much worse situation in terms of infrastructure. And only 2 days ago, the people of Deir Balut protested against the administration of the camp because they saw some forms of injustice. Because you're talking about layers and layers of injustice, and maybe some issues of corruption and things like that. So even the last time they received drinking water was 10 days ago. And they protested against and that, and the response was also again brutal by whoever's controlling these areas.
So let's stay in Deir Balut. Who's running it? Is it UNRWA? Is it opposition?
No,
is it Turkish?
It's a very good question, Nasser. UNRWA, it reminds me to reiterate the responsibility of UNRWA. Yes, we know that UNRWA is facing financial difficulties due to the American policy and not paying its share to the United Nations, including UNRWA. Yes, we know that, but it does not negate the fact that they have moral responsibility. They didn't even try to reach them. We don't know how many exactly because nobody actually went there and did the counting and registered the names. So we have approximate numbers of refugees. So UNRWA have neglected the ex-Yarmouk internally displaced Palestinians, and there is also discriminatory policy between this group and other groups of Palestinians. For example, those who stayed in other areas of Damascus and those who went to Lebanon in terms of the bi-monthly payment. Yep. So we can mention more details later, but UNRWA is not there. Yep. So who's running the camps? Opposition-held forces, but that's not. We have to say that this is not Nusra, this is not ISIS. So this is what the international community call moderate opposition in collaboration with Turkish charity organizations like AFAD and Maram.
Okay, so but Turkey still has both Turkey and Lebanon and Jordan now have their own particular rules with respect to A, refugees from Syria, but then B, Palestinian refugees.
Exactly. The rules when it comes to allowing Palestinians or holders of Syrian travel documents, what we call وثائق السفر السورية, and to explain this quickly to our listeners, travel document is not a passport, it's a para-passport, and it's given by the authorities to the Palestinian refugees. It's given by the Syrians to the Palestinian Syrians, and also by the Egyptians to the Palestinian Egyptians, and by Iraq to the Palestinian Iraqis. And the same goes in Lebanon. So the holders of these para-passports or travel documents were banned from entering Jordan, banned from entering Lebanon, and from entering Turkey. These discriminatory policies were taken by these three countries a few weeks after the eruption of the civil war in Syria in 2011, in contrast to the treatment of Syrian refugees by these three countries. So we're talking about black and white discrimination. Now, Turkey, while it actually provided the camps with some form of charity, but it still prevents the Palestinians from entering. And we have to mention Hala al-Mahmoud, 15-year-old Palestinian teenager who was shot dead by the Turkish border police while trying to cross the border with her family. So this is just one example that represents what happened to tens and maybe hundreds of Palestinians and Syrians who tried to cross the border in the last 2 years. The Turkish police did not target Hala because she's Palestinian, but they apply zero tolerance towards entering the border by either Syrians or Palestinians as of December 2016. And anyone who tried to infiltrate through these borders will be shot dead. Unfortunately, the Palestinians who tried, we've seen more examples than Hala.
The depravity and inhumanity continues, Yusuf. The inhumanity in denying Palestinian refugees at the door, before Turkey closed the door, before Lebanon and Jordan did as well. The reality, and it can be nothing, it can put it down to no other reason but economics. Because the Palestinians are funded through UNRWA and not UNHCR. The reality is that these three governments know how fickle UNRWA funding is, how challenged it can be, and what has borne out, because we know what Donald Trump is doing, trying to blackmail and force the Palestinians into submission with defunding UNRWA. That Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan are complicit with Donald Trump now by denying the Palestinians. It's purely an economic reason. Because they're going to have to pay for those refugees themselves if UNRWA doesn't, and UNRWA can't and won't. Whereas a standard Syrian, they're going to get UNHCR money, which is under no threat.
Totally agree, Nasser. Now, these three countries know that they will be stuck with the Palestinians when it comes to international aid, especially that UNRWA is going through difficulties and has been for the last, forever, even
probably 69 years.
especially in the last decade. Now, but I must add also another reason, because the Palestinian refugees are a living reminder of the failure of the Arab regimes in 48.
Absolutely.
And therefore, this is what Edward Said explained in one of his books, the non-welcoming attitude of some Arab regimes towards Palestinian refugees is attributed greatly also, in addition to economic reasons, to the fact that this is a living reminder of the failure of the Arabs in preventing the creation of Israel in 48. Now, whatever the reason is, we also have to highlight the fact that this group of people, whether inside Syria, like internally displaced, or whether those who made it somehow to Lebanon or Egypt or Turkey, are treated as second-class refugees, because the mainstream refugees, the Syrian refugees, have access to registration and protection and resettlement by the UNHCR. The Palestinians of Syria don't have access to that, simply because the UNHCR tells them you are part of UNRWA and that you cannot be part of two UN bodies. And when they do go to UNRWA in Lebanon, for example, UNRWA tells them, sorry, we are overloaded and underfunded, and it could take us hours and hours to talk about the treatment of Palestinian Lebanese in Lebanon and their living standards that are way below human standards. So, by the way, the UNRWA is not protection and resettlement. UNRWA is relief and work, and therefore the ex-Syria Palestinians have fallen through the cracks of laws of these two UN bodies, and the result is very negative, and it affects the livelihood of thousands of Palestinians from Syria.
We shouldn't say livelihood in the sense of a vocation, but
No.
in the sense that their ability to live.
Survival, I should say, not livelihood.
Survival,
Survival is the right word, you're right. So we also have to understand that 3 weeks ago, the Syrian authorities issued a list of 8,000 detainees who were declared dead in prison. Among these 8,000, there are 557 Palestinians. This group of people who were tortured to death and disappeared for more than 6 years were civilians. None of them carried weapons. None of them took part in militant confrontation. These people have family. They have relatives, they have neighbors, they have friends, They published their names and they started sharing stories about how they disappeared. We mentioned Hassan, a Palestinian YouTuber from Yarmouk who showed us the culture of Yarmouk beautifully, the wedding parties in Yarmouk, the internal jokes that were going through Yarmouk. We also mentioned Niraz Saeed, a Palestinian photographer who was awarded by international media. So these people were civilians.
And these people went to the Assad gulags and were
disappeared for 6 years. And now al-Assad said, well,
by the
they
way,
had heart attacks. They didn't say they were tortured to death. They told their families that they had heart issues and lung issues, and didn't give the dead bodies. There's no burial as well.
No.
So where we are today, Nasser, we are in another crisis, humanitarian crisis that's affecting more than 1,100 Palestinian families, and these families are the grandsons of refugees
and granddaughters
and
probably even great.
So we're talking third and fourth generation of Palestinians who will continue to pay the price of statelessness, pay the price of being Palestinian, because the international community failed to acknowledge the importance of having a just and peaceful...
And continues to fail in its obligation to deliver on the promise of a Palestinian state. We're 70 years past the establishment of Israel as a Jewish homeland. The world is complicit, the United Nations is complicit, the Arab governments that stood idly by and continually allow now, 6-7 million Palestinians to maintain the depravity of statelessness to living as a refugee in, forlorn camps with, poor services, the lack of opportunity in jobs, education, travel documents, just hostage to the benevolence and the whims of dictators and kings and autocrats.
Nasser, 2 points before we leave this sad topic. First, in early 2013, and in response to the flight of Palestinian Syrians, President Mahmoud Abbas tried to resettle some of them in the Palestinian territories via the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon went to Netanyahu. Netanyahu said that's fine, but only if they agree to forego in right their right of return to their original hometowns and villages. Of course, President Abbas rejected that villain proposal, and it ended there. The other point was the most recently, that's something I only heard a few days ago from them, that there was an offer by Israel to help resettle them in Europe if they issue a statement of gratitude to Israel, thanking Israel for its efforts. And of course, 110% of them said F you to Israel. We're not going to accept to Mr. Netanyahu.
And just to close off, Yusuf, we just want to remind our listeners about the upcoming APAN event on Tuesday, Palestinian Children's Experiences with the Military Court System. A reminder that on Tuesday, August the 21st, at 6:30 p.m. at the Ibis Hotel, we've got Salwa Dubois and Jared Horton, who are the co-founders and directors of Military Court Watch, which is an organisation focused on supporting and advocating for the rights of Palestinian children living under Israeli military occupation. Jared Horton is an Australian lawyer, a barrister, who gave up a thriving practice in Sydney to go work in Palestine and document the atrocities of children as young as 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 being dragged out of their beds in the middle of the night, questioned in a foreign language, forced to sign confessions in a foreign language without legal representation, without their parents being present, and the 99.5% conviction rate of the Israeli military apparatus. So please go to apan.org.au, and we'd love to see you there Tuesday night, August 21.
A very important event indeed, and special offer to our listeners.
Yeah, Yusuf. So if our listeners email jessica@apan.org.au, jessica@apan.org.au, send her an email and say that you heard this advertisement on 3CR, and you'll get a free ticket. So we've got 10 of those to give away.
Excellent.
The first 10, so hurry.
With this devastating coverage of another black chapter of the Palestinian suffering. We've come to the end of this week's edition of Palestine Remembered. Thank you for being with us, and remember to tune in next Saturday, same time, 9:30 in the morning. Thank you, Nasser.
Thanks, Yusuf.